So what I'm going to do is, as Eric asked, tell you a little bit of a story. The transport work stream is not a very sexy concept, to be completely frank. We all know that. When we're talking about the problem of cloud, it seems like we would gravitate toward the topics of metadata or coding or interoperability, or and it all comes back to software, and it all comes back to how we actually move content, and that's where we stopped. So it's not about transport. It's not about connectivity. It's not about file transfer. It's about access. It's about how do we access our content? How do we treat our content? How do we make our content available for others? We need to target the conversation toward all of those factions, the technology companies, the media companies, both the legacy media companies that are burdened with the weight and pressures of having to evolve their current infrastructure while they remain burdened with the productions at hand and still implement new production solutions, new workflows, new infrastructure, new solutions to mature themselves and remain competitive in the environment where we're now faced with technology companies that are content producers and also cloud providers. So it's a challenging topic. So I'm going to talk to you about how we came together in our thinking a bit. When the ETC was first organizing the various work streams pertaining to production in the cloud, and we established the transport work stream, we started with a group of people who were, again, challenged with the problem at hand, who were in the production aspect of a lot of our legacy media companies. Unfortunately, they knew what the problem was, but they didn't know how to solve it. So we had a bit of a chat, and we decided to invite some of our best technology companies, some of those that had the greatest breadth, some of those who maybe we worked with most broadly across the industry, and also some niche partners who could help us to be creative thinkers, who could help us to reimagine our workflows. There's a substantial amount of physical labor that still goes into a given production. The actual movement of content that takes place is overwhelming, and the nature of that content movement is still traditionally drives, because frankly it's cheaper, couriers because frankly it's faster, and manual movement. And I've heard several people reference file folder management, file folder watching and forwarding, and that's absolutely true. The time that it takes us to then receive that drive, ingest that drive, upload that drive, treat that drive, and then move it to the next point where the same process happens in reverse any number of times throughout a given production is daunting. So it's not transport, it's access. How do we do that? What do we do about that? What does that mean to us? Given the proliferation of technologies that we're leveraging in the media industry, and now what I'm talking about are the technologies that all of our companies are developing on a constant basis to enhance the value of the content itself, to actually realize creative intent, whether it's vision solutions or whether it's audio solutions or whether it's any combination of those things. What we're doing is dealing with this is a substantial volume of content. And moving that content is debilitating. The impact on our production schedules is awe-inspiring. So what we need to improve is efficiencies. And again, that's not sexy. This topic has actually been addressed a number of times over the last 20 to 30 years. 30 years, if we're being honest with ourselves. And it's never gotten off the ground for the media industry. I want to be clear, oil and gas and healthcare, these industries have been leveraging these solutions for a long, long time, decades in fact. Since the early 90s, our technology partners, our cloud service providers, if you will, our carriers, our data center providers, et cetera, they've been savvy to this, and they've been building the infrastructure on which we actually leverage services, if you will. So again, this is new to the media industry. And why the media industry was never able to leverage these technologies in the past was because of the breadth of our business. Really, our business spans the globe. Our business is extremely time constrained, and it's the volumes of total content within those time constraints that is unique to our business. So we couldn't leverage the solutions that were implemented because they weren't broadly implemented enough. What we needed was for those technology partners to get together, to collaborate, because fundamentally that's what media does differently. We collaborate. We collaborate on significant volumes of content on a constant basis. In fact, I often reference over 150 companies are credited with the production of Skyfall, and that's just on IMDb, which is generally wrong. So that's just one example. Yes, a large picture, but it's a very good example, and you could mirror that for any given production or broadcast. So we got together a couple of technology companies, and we thought about what we could do to really spread the message. Again, not construct something that didn't already exist, but really spread the message. I'm going to take you through just a couple more conversation points. Again, I said that the trick is to treat it as access, not transport. So to try to limit the frequency with which we're moving the data, and that's a twisting of our thinking in the media environment. That's a twisting of the ocean, if you will. So the access to that content. What I mean is that we need to think about central points of localization, whether that's within our own company's cloud or within our service provider's cloud, or a bit of a combination of both. Because when we talk about cloud, most of us have a cloud, actually. And we leverage clouds, actually, if we're being really honest. We leverage private, public, and hybrid clouds on a constant basis. So how do we map those together? And how do we make smart choices about where we host that content? And also, can we think about how we can make that content available to others without moving it? So these are the concepts. I also want to go back to what I said before about efficiency gains. How do you sell this to a new group of folks? What are the attributes? And you always say, all right, well, is it cost? Well, is it time? It is efficiency. It's all of those things. It's absolutely every aspect. It's the ability to leverage the technologies that we're developing to better affect the creative quality of our content. That's what we want to remember that's special about media. Okay, so how do we remove the magic? Now what I'm talking about is this. My background is actually in leading large networking teams, and what was stunning to us was that the breadth of effort we spent supporting our production teams, tremendous, talented, capable teams, was in helping them to negotiate connectivity with their service providers, with their partners, with their customers, even with their competitors at times. And the time that took and the impact on the total production was tremendous and high risk. So what we want to talk about today is removing the magic, as I said, removing the burden on the production to make a choice based on the connectivity that they have. We talk about on-demand services. This is still a lift for some of our technology providers. They need a business model to affect the investment. Some of our service providers have already had this in place for a number of years. Others are getting wise to the fact that our production schedules can be 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months max. That bears a burden. That bears a burden of investment on their end. But again, as I said, most of these technologies and services already exist today. So it's just about us now starting to leverage those solutions and doing that as a community, meaning talking to our service providers and creating an ecosystem of collaboration that allows us to choose our service providers, whomever they are, as long as they're participating in this common thinking. We can garner services from any production partner, from any cloud partner, from any carrier, you name it. Again, as long as we decide to collaborate. What I'm talking about is peering. And a lot of people talk to us, a lot of people come and talk to us in the media industry about peering. They want us to come to their data center, lift the whole thing up that we just invested and implemented a couple of years ago, come to their data center in their point of presence, use their carriers, and they'll peer us with the internet providers. But here's the trick. You can peer from wherever you are. You can connect one data center to another data center. You don't have to do it yourself. They've already done it. They have already developed the partnerships to do it. And the presence that the predominant data center providers have is tremendous. So you can take your pick. You don't have to change carriers. You don't have to change data center providers. You just have to tell them to work together. And they will. So what I'm talking about is bringing the asset to the production ecosystem rather than the ecosystem to the asset. I'm talking about treating it like access. The current problem we're faced with today, as I mentioned, is our content largely has to move amongst all of these facilities. Depending on the workflow itself, any number of facilities, locations, and businesses may be involved in a given production. I'm going to zip through this just a little bit. Bear with the animation. So, what if we worked a bit differently? What if it were easier to get online? Actually, as many of my colleagues have mentioned, there are data centers within 1,000 miles of every metro area. I'm sorry, in every metro area and 1,000 miles of every major point that is offering tax incentives. We can get online. We can use these providers because, again, I mentioned that about 20 and 30 years ago, they got smart. The colo providers and the cloud providers are actually in the same spot. The major carriers are actually in the same spot. So when you think of where you connect in a Los Angeles, a San Francisco, a New York, Toronto, London, etc., you're all homing into the same common locations. They're already on net. And as they proliferate the expansion of the fiber in the ground, and as our wireless providers become a bit more hungry, and as our compression technologies improve, we can better garner those services. The on-demand part, as I mentioned, we're shaming them into it. That's the trick. Originally, we talked about solving the problem of kiosks. You know, how do we make it a possibility for productions to actually upload their content, regardless of where they are in the bayous of Louisiana, et cetera, at a local theater or at a local data center or at a local Starbucks. That's still a work in progress. We're talking about a pretty broad expanse of space here globally. But it is easier. Certainly, there are common points of aggregation in your metro areas. So what if instead we brought the asset to the production, as I mentioned? What if instead of moving the content around these facilities, each of these facilities accessed that content in common location? Again, I'm not advocating the solution. Just to be very, very clear, I'm not advocating the provider that you choose or whether you do it in your domain or in a cloud provider's domain. What I'm saying is that you can make an informed decision about this, and their economics of scale are what you should be applying to your decision-making process. For Company A, it may make more sense for them to locate that content on infrastructure that they own and house themselves in a common location. For Company B, it may make more sense for them to leverage, public cloud solutions. For Company C, they may want a bit of a hybrid, and always we should be thinking about security. That's the other key point to remember, is that every time we touch the content, every time we upload it, every time we download it, every time we ingest it, every time we move a drive, we increase the level of vulnerability. By using digital workflows, by commonly locating the content, by using access control, authentication, and encryption, and services like this, by automating processes, we're actually mitigating those security concerns. A bit of a loop on this? I do. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, there we go. Now we're going the right way. That was a do-over just to make sure you were paying attention. Chuck was, by the way. This is bringing the asset to the workflow versus bringing the workflow to the asset. There you go. So this is actually commonly locating it. This is doing your work in the middle. Now, what we're going to see at NAB this year is going to be mind-blowing, I'm sure. The last 2 years have been extremely impressive. Again, the compression technologies, the remote access technologies, the providers are savvy, and they're getting savvier. And again, these solutions are being leveraged by other industries. So they're already fairly mature in most cases. Those that are being developed specifically for media companies, partner with these companies, partner with them and influence their development. This is happening for us today so that we can offsite more and more services and, again, make better use of the economics of scale. We can be more efficient. We can move that content less frequently. We can leverage artists and production folks around the world and not have to move that content, lose that time, impact those windows, leverage the ability to implement new technologies, again, which enhance the quality of the content itself and realize creative intent. So this is our messaging. Okay, so just a little bit about this. I wanted to give you a snapshot. This highlights something that one of my colleagues discussed earlier, and this is the concept of being able to remotely, in an automated format, provision your connectivity. One of our teammates, Equinix, has actually implemented a solution like this, and they're partnering with carriers around the world to support this effort. What it is software-defined networking. So we have connectivity to a common media exchange, a common point of presence, if I'm being very tactical, let's say in a metro area. And let's say a number of our partners do as well. Again, media companies, technology companies, etc. Let's say that those common points of entry are sprinkled across the world, and we can use the backbone of our favorite carrier to get us from Los Angeles to New York. That's wonderful, but we don't want to pay for it 100% of the time because we don't need it 100% of the time. So what Equinix has done is actually lay up an environment that will allow us to go online and in 45 seconds provision a circuit, actually allow ourselves to access that bandwidth on demand. This is something that, again, they're brokering with a number of our favorite companies, and I hope that you'll all partner with them and get more companies on board because everyone should be our favorite company. And, that's an important point to note, actually. One of the things media likes is choices. We like the competition of the environment. We like to be able to leverage the best provider for that particular production, for that location, for that solution. We like to be able to choose. Choosing makes you sticky, so all right, so again, we're talking about provisioning. It's actually 45 seconds, but of course, once the circuit has to negotiate and so on, we put 5 minutes here and there just to protect ourselves. I mentioned it's SDN enabled. I mentioned CapEx versus OPEX, always the hot button. So something about this, we all talk about needing to be more OPEX focused than CapEx focused. Remember that there's CapEx in a build. There's CapEx in a build cost. So every time we have to negotiate with a new provider and their circuit isn't available in our facility, that bears with it an additional CapEx cost. We want to be smarter than that. We want to be able to garner our selection based on who we prefer and who we want to negotiate contracts with versus who our partner, customer, or provider has negotiated contracts with. And then finally, we want to be able to, again, leverage a broad ecosystem. So we want as many partners and providers to participate in this as possible. We want all the media companies, the new and the old, the modern and postmodern, if you will. And we want to be able to leverage the facilities that we're in as well without having to lose that investment, but to mature over time and make choices as we age, as we learn about cloud services, about where we want to be located and what makes the most sense for our company. So the old school. The old school was we had to use who we had to use because that's who our customer or provider or partner was using. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to be able to choose. So we want everyone to participate in this environment. We were limited in terms of global reach. There was a lot of long haul, what we call point-to-point circuits, very expensive. You wanted to get from LA to New York or LA to London, you had to nail that circuit up all the way across the globe, even to India. What we want to be able to do is just access our local on-ramp. If we're in LA, we want to access the POP in LA. If we're in San Francisco, we want to access the POP in San Francisco and India and Singapore and you name it. What we want to do is leverage the best provider that we choose across to move our content or access our content around the globe. And remember, I would prefer you accessed it. And finally, I'm sorry, this is doable. Again, I want to remind you that there are over 20,000 points of presence that I'm referring to globally. In fact, I'm sure that number is far less mature today than it was when we put this slide up there, but it is a pretty robust footprint. The internet is a shockingly physical thing, but it does aggregate in key points of presence. And then finally, we want to be able to access these services that are co-located with low latency. We don't want to have to be burdened by the additional time delay that it takes for us to access our content because we want to be able to leverage more and more and more services offsite. Okay, so we want scalable solutions, we want on-demand capacity, we want automation. We should talk about that. We should talk about automating solutions. What I'm talking about is you not having to sit there and watch a folder. I'm talking about you not having to upload content. I'm talking about you not having to download content. I'm saying don't spend time on those steps. Automate those processes. Spend time on QC. Spend time where you need human interaction. Spend time actually making creative decisions. And finally, what we want is obviously in the long term to sponsor our technology companies to think about where they can develop solutions for local on-ramps in our more remote areas where we do production work, in our tax incentivized areas. And for efficiency gains, in terms of efficiency gains, again, building pools of storage, thinking about data gravity, thinking about the extreme influx in file sizes. thinking about the ability to code and script and essentially automate these solutions. Also thinking about the interaction between our tool sets. Can we create interaction? And yes, we can, from our network to through to our tool sets to ultimately our creative interfaces. Yes, we can. Our VFX houses globally are already using a lot of these solutions, so it's about proliferating that implementation across the production and post-production processes. Again, I talked about low latency. There are a tremendous number of very skilled companies who are improving the management of compression and latency over time. Again, I'm sure we'll see a lot of very exciting announcements at NAB. And then finally, this is the most important piece, and that's that this is not a change to the tools themselves, but a change to the way that you work. This is about thinking about how you can get rid of that drive, thinking about how you can move that content digitally, thinking about where that content really should be sitting in order to be most efficient. Do you need to pull it down? Do you need to push it up? If you don't need to do that, if you can co-locate your infrastructure, let's say your solutions infrastructure, even the special things that you do, if you can co-locate that in common areas, then that's the thing to do. Again, treating it like access instead of transport. That's it. That's what I have for you today. Any questions?